I have a friend named Steve, and he writes haiku. I've actually read haiku to you from him before, and I thought I'd share another one because he wrote one about today's gospel. And it goes like this. Faith is our day job. Don't throw mountains in the sea. Just preach, love, and serve. Let me read that again. Faith is our day job. Don't throw mountains in the sea. Just preach, love, and serve. Now, what I like about this haiku that he did is it starts off with really an important aspect, which is faith is our job. It's not something that sort of drops from down on high on top of us. It's our work. It kind of reminds me of one of my favorite American authors. And I had the chance to listen to a lecture to him about 30 years ago. A guy was named Kurt Vonnegut. Maybe you've heard of him. Wrote a book called Slaughterhouse-Five and a couple of others. And after he gives this lecture, there's a Q&A session. And somebody says, Mr. Vonnegut, how do you get inspired to write all these wonderful books? And he sort of leans on this stool, I think, and he says, inspiration? He said, I had 6 kids to feed. He said, there's nothing about inspiration at all. You sit down and you start writing. And sometimes it's garbage. And sometimes it's good. But you just keep writing. That's it. Which is pretty much our gospel today. Because you have the disciples, and they have just been asked by Jesus to do something, and they're freaking out. And they say, we can't do this. Increase our faith. And Jesus says to them, look, you don't need more faith. What you need is to get off of your bottoms and get going. You don't need more faith? Let's go back to my friend's haiku for a minute. Faith is our day job. It's our job. It's not something that we get. It's something we do. It's our work. Faith is action. And Jesus is trying to say to them, now you have everything you need. Get to work. That's why he tells that little parable just after that. It may not seem to make sense at first. What does that got to do with the mustard seed thing? Now he's talking about slaves. But at that time, the slave, of course, could be an indentured servant, could be somebody captured in war. But the important thing is they don't get thanked for what they do. The master comes in, he does the job, and he goes about it. He does it because it's his job. And for us, our faith is our job. Now, as we move on from there, we ask ourselves, what is our job? And what is holding us back from doing that job? That's where this is all about. We know that our job is faith. But we also know that there are a lot of things that stop us. We are afraid that we're not inspired enough. We're afraid that we're not good enough. We're afraid that we're not educated enough. One of the first things we ever learned when we walked into seminary was, you're never going to be good enough. You are not Mr. Holy. And you will never be more holy than the next guy to you in the pew next door. You're just never going to be all that. There's even an article in the Articles of Religion. Now, if you don't know what the Articles of Religion are, you can turn to page, I think it's 861 in your prayer book. It's in the back in the historic section. And now I'm watching everybody open up their prayer books. And it's I don't remember which number article, but it talks about the unworthiness of ministers. I love that one. And although it's in sort of 17th century language, the essence of it is, if you don't go to communion because the priest is a bum, then you don't know what communion's about. Then you're not doing your job. Because it has nothing to do with how holy the guy up at the altar is. Thank goodness. It has everything to do with coming to the Lord, coming up to God's altar so that you can be fed and inspired and filled with the body and blood of Christ. It has nothing to do with how good, how bad, or how stupid, or how brilliant, or how anything else the priest is. It's not about the perfect conditions. It's not about having the right inspiration. It's not even about getting the right results. A lot of times we stop ourselves from doing something because we're afraid, first of all, maybe we don't have people with us, or we're afraid that the results won't be good. And Jesus is saying, results are going to vary. That's okay. You may not be ready. That's okay. You may not think that you're good enough or smart enough. That's okay. None of that matters. All that matters is that your job is to be faithful. Now go do it. Not that Jesus is suggesting, or I'm suggesting, that we go off half-cocked. Faithful action generally starts with prayer, with study, with thought. You don't just go out and do it. But you don't just let yourself be stopped completely because the conditions aren't right. Let's backtrack for just a moment, or pause for just a moment, and ask ourselves, what exactly is this action that we're talking about? What is this faithful action? And that's going to be variable, isn't it? That kind of depends on what you're called to. Maybe you're sitting there thinking, wouldn't it be great to have more adult education here? Wonder who could do that. I can't do it. And then all of a sudden you realize, I can, because it's my job. You don't have to know all that to be involved in adult education or to lead adult education. You don't have to be a priest. Or maybe you're thinking, I want to really have a more disciplined prayer life. But I don't know anything about it. I don't know all these prayers. I don't know. And I'm not that kind of a guy. I'm not a monk. Or maybe you're thinking, I've seen all this stuff in the news and all this social justice stuff going on where people's civil rights are being violated. Wouldn't it be great if somebody did something about that? But not me, because it's not my neighborhood, or because I don't know anything about it, because, I don't know. I'm not that kind of a person where I can just go out there. And what Jesus is saying is, if you're waiting for the perfect conditions, they're never going to get there. If you're waiting to be inspired, you've got all the inspiration you need. Now get off of your bottom and go do it. This leads us back to the disciples and the great thing that caused them such anguish, where they said, we can't do this, increase our faith. What was it that Jesus had asked them to do? Was it throw a mountain into the sea? Was it raise somebody from the dead? Maybe just heal the sick? Maybe just feed the hungry? Maybe it was just go out there and preach the gospel. If you had Bibles with you, and you can bring Bibles to church, I'm perfectly cool with that. But if you had a Bible with you right now, I'd ask you to open up to the beginning of that chapter. It's just a few verses back. and you'd see what he says to them. You know what he says? He says, forgive. Forgive those who sin against you. Forgive those who hurt you. That's what completely blows their minds. Please, Jesus, let us go throw a mountain in the sea. That's hard. That's easier. But Jesus knows that's one of the hardest things, right? And the disciples, these young guys, they know it intuitively too. We can't do that. It's too hard. But Jesus doesn't say, wait until you're ready. Wait until it feels good. Wait until they say you're sorry. Wait until you know that they'll accept your forgiveness. He didn't say any of that. He says, this is your job. Go and do it. We get a couple of things out of today's gospel. One of them is that the difficult things Jesus asks us to do are not always the big flashy ones. It's not always the throwing the mountains into the sea or raising the dead sort of a thing. Sometimes one of the hardest things God can ask of you is to say, you are a beloved child of God, and I forgive you. And the other lesson is that it is our job as people of faith to do just that. To not wait for the perfect conditions, to not wait for inspiration, to not wait for a guarantee that it's all going to work out. Bishop Catherine Roscom once said, God calls you to be faithful, not successful. Or, as my friend Steve wrote, faith is your day job. Don't throw mountains in the sea. Just preach, love, and serve. Amen.